today really drove home. These were brutal, brutal murders. Very personal, up close and personal.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we're all just trying to survive in a rough world.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the best guests in all of true crime, and today is no exception. It is week 4. We've made it a month into the double murder trial of embattled former attorney Alex Murdaugh. He, of course, is accused of killing his wife and youngest son, Maggie and Paul, all at the family's Colleton County property back in June of 2021. And that, of course, my friends, is just a fraction of the story. We have our best guest joining us today. You're looking at the inimitable Gigi Mi-Kelvey. She's host of the popular true crimes podcast, Pretty Lies Alibis, one of the best names out there. She's also been covering the Alex Murdaugh trial from the get-go for the Law and Crime Network. And if you can't watch the trial, don't worry. She's breaking it all down, all the testimony every day. She told me she's putting out a podcast right after this episode is done recording. And then the new face on the screen is Taylor Bell. He is focused on representing criminal defendants ever since his student days at the University of South Carolina School of Law, where he got his law degree back in 2011. During law school, he clerked at the Richland County Public Defender's Office in Columbia and continued to work there as an attorney, earning his law license, and he remained at the Public Defender's Office for 6 years before moving to a private firm where he continues to lawyer. Quick programming notes, please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. And if you watch the show, you know by now, my 7 and 8-year-old daughters want you to hit that subscribe button and the like button. It gets the algorithm chugging. So, Gigi, the drama around this trial continues to grow. We find out on Monday that there's now a COVID outbreak. What was the deal with that? They had to basically remove 2 jurors, and there was a threat of this trial kind of hanging in the balance. Where do we stand as of right now?
As of right now, Judge Newman is not stopping testimony. Both sides actually, to me, I thought really made clear they would rather pause the trial, let everybody get over it, instead of risking losing what alternate jurors you have. We're down to 3 now. That's not many. And we still have a little ways to go. The state hasn't even wrapped up yet. They're not expected to till Wednesday. We've got all the defense case. So 3 jurors, I think it's a little bit of a risk because I'm going to tell you that stuff spreads like wildfire. We're all breathing the same air in there. So yeah, but as of right now, masks are optional. He's not going to limit the number of spectators allowed in, no social distancing. So we all going to get COVID.
And so it's interesting because Judge Clifton Newman, to Gigi's point, said, I'm not going to make them social distance. I will suggest wearing masks. Obviously, if this was even a year ago, there'd be no question we'd all be wearing masks. Even I'd be wearing a mask doing a podcast about it because that's how crazy it was. And, they would be sitting 6 feet apart. But Taylor, to you, you're a criminal defense attorney. You get curveballs thrown at you all the time, but this is kind of one that's out of your hands, but it could derail this trial in some way.
It absolutely could derail the trial. But it doesn't surprise me, Judge Newman, having been in front of him numerous times. He was based here in Richland County as our chief administrative judge for a while when I was a public defender and then later on in private practice. He chugs forward. He's a man that likes to get things done, and he's going to keep moving. However, there are only 3 alternates left. And if you don't have any alternates, and if something comes up down the road, even in jury deliberation, someone didn't disclose something, it could be grounds for a mistrial, and you don't have enough jurors to sit in there and make a decision.
Gigi, I mean, that's like a nightmare scenario. Just if it does catch like wildfire, which it has a tendency to do, and there has to be a mistrial because of something like COVID, that would freak a fair amount of people out, right? Not to mention probably you have to go back and cover it.
I know, because I'm so happy that we're almost done with the state's case. It's been a month. I go home on the weekends, but like I'm missing the quality time with my kids. So doing this again, just I can't even think about it right now. But yeah, so I was actually kind of shocked with both sides suggesting maybe we take a week off, or they didn't say a time, but enough time to make sure everybody's non-symptomatic. But no, we're gonna keep going forward. The jurors will be retested on Wednesday, though. So I'm thinking maybe if we have another positive case by Wednesday, if not on Wednesday, maybe then he will, put a little pause button on this trial. I mean, it's just a huge risk, like Taylor said.
Well, Gigi, I know the alibis would be devastated, but maybe to get away from my kids, if we go to another trial, a second trial, I will leave for a month to get a little bit of a vacation for my kids, and I'll sit in that courtroom for you. But the other thing, that there's a lot of news, quite a bit of news actually during the onset of this fourth week of the trial. We talked about this previously last week, and some defense attorneys said to me, hey, and prosecutors said, I wouldn't be surprised if Alex Murdaugh had to take the stand because he's got to account for this alibi and this, and this time of death and where he was and why does he appear on these videos when he says he wasn't there. Gigi, what are you hearing about this, that he could take the stand and as soon as midweek this week?
They're actually saying it could happen as early as next week, but there are several local sources that have tweeted out just this afternoon that word on the street is there's a really good chance he will take the stand in his own defense. I did not see that coming, to be honest. But that's what people are saying. Two reporters that are in the courtroom right now, I believe, as well. So, clearly they've got some information. I don't know. Taylor, what do you think? Is that the best decision for Alex Murdaugh, or does he have to do it?
I honestly think that he has to do it in this case. I don't think that they can impeach him from anything that hadn't already come in. They've already gotten into all the financial crimes, all of his, closet garbage that they tried to prevent to come in, and it's already come in. So that's just going to be an admission to all of those crimes when he takes a stand. I don't think it's going to hurt him any more than it already has, having come in. And there's some explanations on that Snapchat video because according to law enforcement, he's previously told SLED that he was never down at the kennels. Now, during opening, Harpootlian got up there and said that he was down there. So, we still hadn't seen the video necessarily of him saying that he wasn't down there. I assume that there's some video out there of them interviewing him, and that's going to be introduced at some point in time. But if that comes in, he's going to have to take the stand to explain that, because that's the dagger here right now, based on his alibi, is him being down there in that Snapchat video.
And Taylor, you and I were talking off camera before getting on here, and you said something interesting, which is kind of counterintuitive, because lawyering 101 is you don't let the defendant speak, but you were saying that you've had more cases where the defendant won when testifying at trial than not. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. I've probably had more not guilties when my client got up there and testified than when I didn't allow my client to testify, or I suggested that he not testify and he agreed with me. Yeah, it's counterintuitive because I think ultimately the jury wants to hear from the defendant, no matter whether the judge says you can't take it or hold it against him remaining silent, that, he has no obligation, despite all the instructions that a trial judge gives, the jurors, they want to hear from him.
So the videos, we talked about the two videos, the one, just prior to the murders, and the one an hour and change where he's in a different set of clothing. Taylor, do you think that is the best evidence on the table so far in favor of the state and the biggest problem for the defense?
Repeat that again. The clothing is what my understanding.
Well, there's two videos. There's one that you hear his voice just prior to the actual murders. The state has the timeline, I believe, at 8:50 p.m. and that video, I want to say, is 8:44. Gigi. And then the other video was taken a little over an hour before, and it shows him in a different set of clothing. But do you think that that is the best evidence right now, those two videos that the state has in their case? One to say, look, you can hear his voice just minutes before these murders happen, and the others say he changed clothes, even though it does get hot and sticky in South Carolina that time of year.
Absolutely, along with cell phone records. And apparently there's some new data that they're going to be introducing related to his Suburban that has GPS coordinates. Apparently someone from General Motors was listening to the FBI forensic engineer's testimony and announced that, or brought forward that they did some additional testing and looked through some records and were able to pull some GPS data behind the Suburban. But yeah, I do believe the different clothing. Now the question is, where is this clothing? I mean, I usually can find most clothing that I have in my house, and maybe it's a surprise that defense has up their sleeve. They're going to pull out this clothing. I don't know, but they're saying they're putting on a case. But I also don't have two houses, don't have two house cleaners, housekeepers. So, I don't have anyone other than my wife to help me with my laundry. So I guess you could have clothes go missing when you have multiple houses and multiple housekeepers.
Taylor, you're going to get there. Don't worry. You'll have 3 houses and 3 housekeepers. I know. I can tell already. But Gigi, to you, and we're going to get into this in greater detail in a moment, but the disturbing part of the trial happened today where jurors had to look at autopsy photos from the forensic pathologist. I'm just curious, on Monday when they saw this, what was the facial reaction from the jurors? Were you able to see that?
Yeah. So I have a really good seat every day. I can see the jury. I can see the back of Alex's head, and then I can see the family. But there was one juror in particular, and they called a break in the middle of looking at these autopsy photos for Paul. And she looked like she may physically get sick. It did a number on her, and I felt so bad and sympathetic to her. I mean, it just, and then the same thing when Maggie's autopsy pictures, a little different than crime scene photos. The lighting's bright. You see every little detail. A couple of men looked one guy just kept kind of like holding his beard in a really awkward way. Nobody wants to look at that stuff. There's a reason nobody on that jury works as like a crime scene investigator. They don't want to do that kind of stuff, but you're looking at probably some of the worst pictures, crime scene photos you could probably see. So it was just horror. It was absolute just shock. The jury was, a couple of them would look away after glancing, but there were 1 or 2 that just had very visible physical reactions to seeing it, and nobody said a word. But the judge, I think, caught on to that one particular juror's struggle and called for a little recess, which, just prolonging having to see more. But yeah, so definitely hit them hard, because the first part of the day with the DNA was very confusing, even for us who could take notes. I still have to figure out before I do my episode what was on what, and they were lost.
Were you able to see the photos yourselves, or are they obscured? You're not.
Well, no, they're obscured. So Harpootlian has a piece of cardboard over his monitor, and the family was, they're sitting on that side. But when he was showing the witness, the pathologist, the photos before we entered them in, you could see. With the lighting through it, not details, of course, but you could see some of them. But no, we do not get that on the feed. It's sealed, so we don't even see that in the courtroom, which this is the first courtroom I've ever been in where we don't see the crime scene photos. But, I mean, I'm sure that Buster doesn't want to see that. He was very, kept his head down a lot, face very red. His girlfriend and John Marvin's wife were wiping tears. Just got to be devastating to listen to the fact that your brother's brain was just ejected from his skull. It's terrifying stuff.
And to your point about Harpootlian's monitor being covered, I know Alex Murdaugh did not want to see these photos, and so his monitor, which is Harpootlian's monitor, was covered up, so he did not have to look at it. And if you believe that he is a killer, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that would destroy him to look at it, or because he was able to pull off this act that, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't bother him so much. Who knows? Only he knows. Maybe the man upstairs. But to you, Taylor, how difficult, when you're trying a case, is it in general for jurors to look at these types of images? I mean, these are the most graphic of graphic images. These are civilians doing their civic duty. And as Gigi just said, they don't want to be on an episode of, Today's Coroner, or whatever the show is. So how tough is it, and how do you negotiate that? How do you cushion the blow for jurors?
Well, we have a Rule 403, which typically we argue that the probative value, whether the decision is whether the probative values or prejudicial effect is what you're weighing, whether it's substantially outweighed by the prejudicial effect of the photographs, whether the use of these photographs, that purpose outweighs the prejudicial effect by the heinous nature of the photographs. And so we use that rule to try to limit it. There's some case law out there. I assume they argued that, but I also assume maybe the defense didn't necessarily not want it to come in, because during opening, Mr. Harpootlian, he got up there and said that it was an absolutely horrendous crime scene. And getting up there and saying that, I think he was trying to paint the picture that there's no way that a father could do that to his son or his wife. And so also paint the picture that the person that, or persons that did this, would have been absolutely covered in either blood or human material. And as you say, compartmentalize the photographs. You have to do that, because if you look at them and you don't compartmentalize it in your head, you can't move forward to effectively represent your client one way or the other, whether you have your own personal views about the photographs.
One thing I should have followed up on if I was a good journalist, and I didn't, but I will now. You said you tried cases before Judge Clifton Newman in the past. He seems to be top of the top, the creme de la creme. What was your experience with him? And he seems to be very well organized and moving the trial along despite COVID in the courtroom. But what was your experience?
No nonsense. He's strict. He's going to keep the lawyers in check. And it's going to be his way. He is the one wearing the robe, and he is going to let everybody in that courtroom know that he is in charge. And there's good to that, and there's obviously bad to that, because you can't get away with some of the things that you might be able to get away with from the prosecution or from the defense. Trying to get the slight edge. But he is in charge in that courtroom, no matter what courtroom he is in. Now he is on, he's on his way out, as there is some mandatory retirement that we have in South Carolina. But this is, he's been on some recent high-profile cases, as the Uber case that was tried in Richland County here with a couple of my colleagues. He presided over that. I'm not sure if he presided over the Michael Slager case. I don't recall. That was a while back, but he is one of the most elderly and respected trial judges that we have in this state.
Is there a mandatory age? So at a certain age you have to retire, or is it the amount of time you've put in? How does it work?
We do have a mandatory age. I don't know. I don't recall what it is, but there is an age requirement in South Carolina.
Wow. The U.S. Capitol and Congress might want to consider that. Not that I want to inject.
Let's see.
72?
I'm looking now. I think it's 72.
Yeah. Considering our senators are all in their 80s, maybe we should.
Let me see. That might not be South Carolina though. Our age 70.
Age 70 for mandatory retirement of judges in South Carolina. Gigi, to you, we are in week 4 here. These are jurors who are people like me and you, maybe not Taylor because he's a criminal defense attorney. But what is the sense? Are they getting fatigued? Do they seem interested still? Do they seem like they want to be there? Do they seem like it's time for things to start to wrap up?
It kind of alternates throughout the day depending on who's testifying, to be honest. During the financial crimes, other than really Tony Satterfield, maybe, the people that were closer to Alec, like Chris Wilson and Mr. Crosby, that they were more interested in that. But with the bank stuff, they were just sort of bored. Even today with the DNA, that's something we've been waiting on pretty much the whole trial. But it was, what a smart witness. First of all, she is very obviously super smart. But unlike, when the medical exam or the pathologist was on today, she explained it like you would explain it to a 5-year-old, which is what the jury needs. And I felt like that the DNA testing results was just a little too technical, and those of us with notes were confused. So these guys don't even have notepads. So they seemed a little lost when it came time to tell the results of whose DNA was on what. Then they perked up. But then, as soon as that was answered, and then you got 5 minutes before you get the next answer, but as a whole, this jury, I'm very impressed with them. They have really listened. And there was one of the jurors, I thought, man, she's just always kind of nodding off. Well, I do believe that may be one that was sick with COVID because she's not here. But as a whole, these guys are really, they seem from where I'm sitting, they seem to be doing their job very seriously and focusing on these witnesses as best they can until it gets monotonous.
Well, I can tell you firsthand, I got COVID once, and it was on a trip to my wife's homeland of Los Angeles, and I could not stay awake for 10 days. So maybe she was nodding off for a reason there.
Yeah, I'm not judging at all. I had it in December. Me and my Grammy got it. We were in a place 5 minutes to get her lab work, and we both 3 days later sick as dogs with COVID. And you do want to sleep. And I thought she didn't look like she felt well, but last week especially. So hopefully she'll be okay. But yeah.
So another interesting point is that the prosecution, the state, last week said, "Hey, we're going to wrap up by midweek this week," and everyone said there's no chance. But Gigi, you think there is a chance?
Yeah, after court ended today, Harpootlian just wanted, I guess, confirmation of that, and the state said they do expect to finish still on Wednesday. So I think the next couple of days are going to be the most explosive testimony we're going to get from the state. So hopefully they can tie some things in, because I think there's a lot of open-ended stuff that we don't have answers to. Like the contents in the stomach. That was something I think that was mentioned by the prosecution in openings, if I'm not mistaken. And then today, so all weekend I'm thinking, well, maybe like Maggie and Paul didn't eat what the housekeeper cooked. Maybe it's going to blow that theory they all had dinner, and then it's just, oh yeah, they had this many milliliter cc's in their stomach or whatever. And then it was just something that we've been waiting on. And then again, the hair in Maggie's hand that was found. Mm-hmm. We still don't have an answer for that. I thought that would come out with the DNA stuff, but we'll see. But no, they do expect a wrap on Wednesday. And that was what was said just as court ended today. So we're getting there.
And Taylor, I understand that the defense might take up to about a week to present their case. And that, I guess, would include Alex Murdaugh testifying himself. First of all, if Alex Murdaugh testifies, how long do you think he'll be on the stand for? What's your gut sense of that?
I imagine he'll be on there for at least a day, maybe a day and a half or two. First on direct, and then I imagine that cross-examination will last about a day as well.
Yep.
And when he is when there's the cross on Alex Murdaugh, if he does take the stand, is everything basically fair game at that point for the state to drill down on?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's all fair game at this point because everything's already come in. But, the answer to a lot of these questions probably won't be long for Alex. They'll be, I did that. I did that. Yes, I did that. I think he's going to say that over and over again without any type of hesitation because, he's already admitted to that to the Supreme Court when he lost his bar license. There's a confession of judgment out there relating to these financial crimes. So I don't think it really hurts him getting up there. I think potentially from the juror's perspective, maybe not from the public's perspective, but from the juror's perspective, him owning up to some kind of wrongdoing out there may be a middle ground for them in reaching, yeah, he did these things out there, but did he do this murder? I mean, that's ultimately the question that they're there to answer, as to whether or not there's been enough evidence out there. And, frankly, there's actually, most of the trial's not necessarily been evidence directly or circumstantially pointing to him committing these murders. A lot of it has been to the financial crimes, which he's admitted to. And I understand that's their case, their motive. I'm hard pressed, and I'm hearing hard pressed things from others in the community about the state's motive theory, because there was no insurance policy. Even if Paul, Paul dies, the case, the boating accident case still proceeds because the boat was owned by Alec. So it would still proceed even if Paul's gone. So I'm just having hard press. So,
and that's been the rub against the state the whole time, is that they're making this, all his financial crimes kind of the motive to deflect attention, when a lot of people don't think that's the case. But what will the defense do, in your opinion, on the critical part, which is, okay, we heard his voice, minutes, just a mere 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes before the murders, according to the state, took place. What will Dick Harpootlian, how will he defend that?
There's got to be some answer. There's going to have to be some answer, and it's going to have to be a good answer. Bottom line, that's the most damning evidence that he's there. And according to them, which they've not introduced it, him saying that he wasn't there, that's going to have to come in. And you mentioned, someone to wrap it all up. I assume the lead investigator will be the last witness, as typically it is here in this state, to wrap all the pieces together, to tie the knot up, put it in a bow, and hand it to the jury and say convict. But we're going to hear from the defense too. But typically in the state's case, it's the last witness is typically the lead investigator.
And speaking of the lead investigator, we got a glimpse at some body cam footage that we heard about previously. We'll get into that in a second. But Gigi, to you, do you have a theory on what the defense's case will be as it relates to Alec being there when he says he wasn't there with his alibi? Any thoughts on how they could proceed?
I don't know, because it just doesn't fit in the timeline that Alec gave about what he did that night. He specifically said he tried to call Maggie. He didn't get an answer. Did you go to the kennels? No, I didn't go to the kennels. Now you got him on the kennels literally 3 to 4 minutes before both their phones go silent forever. And with that, it almost puts the murders at about 8:50. So if you go by the last read text that they had. So I don't know how they're going to work their way around that. Do you just say, oh, yeah, well, I forgot I went down there for a second. It didn't stick out to me. But this is the night that your wife and son is murdered. How do you not remember you didn't get the last time you see him is at the kennels when the dog has a chicken in his mouth. So I think that's going to be hard for the defense. I mean, to me, I don't know how do you remedy that? I have no clue.
Harpootlian's been around a long time.
Yeah, he's a wizard in that courtroom for sure, from what I hear.
Yeah, I'm interested. I'm interested to see the spin on that. So let's get to some of the particulars for Monday for those waking up early Tuesday to catch up on all of it. Testimony actually got underway around 10 a.m. Monday. The state called SLED agent Ryan Kelly, basically on there just to confirm that they took swabs of everyone they needed to swab, and then a short time later, Rachel Nguyen, who works in DNA analysis with SLED, she came to testify on the witness stand and tested. She says that she tested the barrels and ammo for blood found at the home and on other weapons, and then testified that one test confirmed blood on the steering wheel of Alex Murdaugh's SUV. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gigi, but we had heard about the seat buckle, but not the steering wheel up to this point. Is that right?
Yeah, the seat buckle was gunshot residue. and it had like one particle, but then the steering wheel was a mixture of blood, and it was, or two DNA profiles, one of those being Maggie, one being Alec. But at the same time, I mean, look, you can't turn these bodies over without being covered in blood. And that's where, for me, it's like a lot of circumstantial, but things don't fit. But it would fit with his story that he tried to check a pulse on the both of them or turn Paul over. That, I guess that's going to be their defense, which is, well, if you touch the body and you have blood on your hand and you touch the steering wheel to go get your shotgun, then that's how it ended up there. There wasn't anything with this DNA today that was just the big aha moment. I mean, still, almost all of this can be explained away. And believe me, I'm not pro this, pro that. I'm very much on the fence right now, whether or not the state's proven the case. But one of the big things is you find out there's no DNA at all on that jacket that belongs to him. There's somebody else's DNA, but it was somebody who wasn't related. Then you also have this other issue, which is a big issue, I think, of, at least for the state, you've got unknown DNA underneath Maggie's fingernails, and she had just went and had a manicure. Now, I can tell you, when they're doing your manicure, like they'll get under there with their own finger to kind of get like a little bit of polish that's right there. But still, these are relatively clean nails that had just been freshly manicured, and you've got this unknown male source of DNA under there that Paul and Alec were excluded. So I think they're going to jump on that too.
Very interesting, a fine detail, but it could be big. Gigi just alluded to it. There were 79 stains on that raincoat that's been in question, the blue raincoat, all testing negative for blood. There was GSR, gunshot residue on the inside of that. But then, Taylor, back to you. Philip Barber on the defense gets up with a very quick cross here of this sled agent and basically just says to the witness, could it be animal blood or several different other kinds of chemicals? And she says yes. So that's a standard tactic on the defense, right? Just to say, hey, it could be animal blood. It might not be anything. And people in that area, especially where they were living in Moselle and all that, it's basically a hunting lodge. So to Gigi's point again, it was kind of easy to disprove. It was a quick one question and out. Smart tactic by the defense there.
Yeah, I don't think the DNA told us anything. I think it wasn't an aha. I think it was more or less the state showing they did these things, not saying that, hey, we're connecting, Alec to these murders based on these DNA. They're doing it so the defense can't come back and say, you didn't test this, you didn't test that, you didn't swab this, you didn't swab that. That's what they're doing. They're trying to show that they did a thorough investigation rather than just sit there and trying to say, aha, this is what is the, this is sums it up for you based on, the DNA being on the steering wheel, the DNA being, I think there was some on the gun, which you would expect there to be, on the gun if he says that he was holding this gun at some particular point in time.
And that was one piece of DNA evidence that actually had both of them. It was labeled as a red-brown stain that had both Maggie and Alex DNA on it as a mixture, but it wasn't blood. So the thing too, though, is, they had so many guns. They had a gun room, for God's sakes. It's not like there was a lack of them. But if somebody had laid that gun down and didn't put it up, and she grabs it to put it on the rack, well, that DNA stays there until you get it off. So it's just like what we did learn today, where there were mixtures, can be explained away by the defense really quickly because they all lived here.
That makes sense. So at 11, just before noon on Monday, another sled agent, this one was Sarah Zabata, took the witness stand to talk about DNA. Is she the one, Gigi, that you thought got a little too technical for the jurors?
Yeah. I mean, you have to explain it to all of us like we're 5-year-olds, because it's not our job. Now, the pathologist did a fantastic job, even using Mr. Waters as a human mannequin. to point out things. I think some kind of a chart, some kind of a visual for these jurors would have been better. Just saying, here's where we found 2 people. Here's where we found Alec and Maggie's DNA. Here's what we tested. We found, all 3 of their DNA. Instead, it's like this quantum physics numbers that I've never even heard of the numbers before. And it's a mixture of, she's a contributor. It's just, you don't even know what jurors know about DNA. I just thought it was very technical. It was one of those times where you look at the jury and like 3/4 of them are kind of like, just, huh? And that's how we were sitting there with notepads. I'm leaning over to the person next to me. I'm like, whose was on there? Very confusing and super smart lady. I mean, don't get me wrong, but when you're trying to explain this to a jury,
that might be the problem. That might have been the problem. She's too smart.
Yeah, no, it's just, but there was such a difference between her and the pathologist, where the pathologist walked you through every single shot to where you really had a visual of how this bullet traveled. And, so I just felt like that was a little confusing for the jury.
And we are going to get to STS Nation questions and comments in a few minutes. Just want to get through the rest of the specifics of the day on Monday. So this SLED agent testifying about the DNA, as Gigi mentioned, testified that both Maggie and Alex's DNA were found in swabs taken from suspected blood on the steering wheel. They also found blood from the shotgun. The pair's DNA was also found from a swab taken, as I said, of suspected blood on the shotgun. Fingernail clippings from Maggie's left hand had a DNA mixture originating from 2 individuals. So again, just reading through it, it gets confusing. But Taylor, to you, we had heard of this body cam and actually heard the audio, but today jurors and the people in the courtroom, I believe, saw the video. This was body cam released of one of the sheriff's deputies, I believe the first one to arrive on scene. And that whole thing with I did him bad came up again. This time you had the visual accompaniment of what he said and how he said it. Is that, Gigi, am I right about all this?
No, that body cam wasn't today.
Oh, it wasn't today. I'm sorry.
Mm-mm.
Okay, but was other body cam footage shown today?
No.
Of another interview?
Mm-mm.
Not that I'm aware of either.
Oh,
no,
okay.
Today was just those few witnesses that you've already named. The body cam came in.
I'm sorry. It was released to the media today, I believe.
Yeah, now that's out there. It's,
Yeah,
the
correct.
bodies are redacted, but they did release that.
That's what I meant to say. I apologize. It's in my notes. So it was released to the media for the court of public opinion. And Taylor, I don't know if you had a chance to see it or not.
Oh, I have. I appeared on another show the day that it came out. On when it was played in the courtroom, and it was slowed down, and I don't remember his name down in Beaufort, the investigator who repeatedly said, even after questioning, that he said, you slow it down. I'm saying it said they. I've slowed it down. I've listened to it. That was terrible for that investigator the day that he testified. He lost every bit of credibility, that he was not willing to even say that I could be wrong. And he was sticking to his guns. And I think that was a bad move by him when he testified about that. But the media, the public's going to be able to make their own opinion. But guess what? Their opinion doesn't matter. The only one that matters is the jury.
And Taylor, you heard they, you're saying.
I heard they.
And Gigi, you heard they.
All day long.
Yeah, it's funny because I've heard both. It's like one of those optical illusions where you look at a photo and it's like one of them is like a woman's profile and the other one's a tiger or whatever. It depends how you look at it. It's kind of same principle here. I think I feel like I've heard him say both and listening to the same exact piece of audio. But then, of course, the difficult part for everyone, which we talked about, but we'll get into a little more detail here, is the state calls Dr. Ellen Reimer. She is a state forensic pathologist and comes out and confirms there were 2 shotgun wounds on Paul, different wounds that you'd expect from a handgun, and says that the gun was fired no more than 3 feet away from Paul. The first shot she testified, was not a fatal shot necessarily. He had his arm down by his side. It was the second shot that went through the side and up. And as Gigi said, I guess most eloquently, without getting too graphic, that ejected his brain from his body. Again, Gigi, this was difficult. It was detailed. Aside from the jurors, what was the reaction like in court, just from the general public as they were listening to all of this?
Yeah, so I sit mainly in front of all the public, but you could kind of hear just with the descriptions, kind of the groans and the, oh my gosh, just, and then when we had that little break, when I think the juror was just very overwhelmed, I turned around and talked to a couple of people and they were like, wow, they got shot. They just didn't know how bad. I mean, there's no good shootings, but I mean, you have this visualization, whether you want to or not, of this poor kid getting his head blown off. And it's not pretty. And I think a lot of people too, I don't know if I said this on the last episode. For me personally, I feel very guilty about it. I didn't really view Paul as a victim until this trial because we've had the boat crash and then we had kind of the way he acted after and then the reputation he had. And it wasn't really until they started going into, in the very beginning, the terrible injuries he sustained that I thought, wow. I mean, he made a bad mistake that cost somebody their life very young. And, then you hear his friend say he's loyal. And then I felt so guilty because I was like, I never really just stopped and said, justice for Paul, because it wasn't the narrative we've had for the last 2 years with everything revolving around the boat crash. But, and I think the public feels that way. I felt people, on the way out, I was just listening and people said, man, wow, I feel really bad for him for the first time ever. Because we've all seen the documentaries. It's Paul getting drunk, Paul, not being nice to his girlfriend, that kind of thing. And then you hear what happened to him. And then it's like, wow, no matter what you did in your life, you don't deserve that. So I think that it really turned at least some of the public. And I did have a couple of conversations with people who kind of echoed what I felt, which was never saw him as a victim really until sitting in openings and hearing kind of a summary. But today really drove home. These were brutal, brutal murders. Very personal, up close and personal.
So this, Taylor, to you, kind of counters the defense's claim that Paul, they said that he may have had his hands up in self-defense. Is that a big deal or not? I mean, can they just kind of say, oh, we were wrong about that now?
I thought the forensic pathologist was some of the best forensic pathologist testimony I've encountered. She was very, I think, likable, very down to earth and not too technical, but technical enough that it kind of gave an explanation of what happened in layman terms. I'm still hesitant about the whole one person theory, though, here with what she said. The theory of switching from one long gun to another long gun, all at close range with only one shooter, to me, I've never heard of that. And I think if you would ask any investigator in that courtroom that ever takes the witness stand, if they've ever had a case where there were two long guns used by one shooter, all shootings at close range, they're going to tell you no. And that's kind of what she talked about. She talked about kind of a shooter of Maggie shooting Maggie with a long gun after there'd been a close range shot to Paul with a shotgun to, I think it was his left side, kind of explained it. And then another one to the left shoulder that ejected through the skull. And then moved on to Maggie with the first couple were not fatal shots. I think it was the third or fourth shot was the fatal shot, according to her, as if they were stalking that individual. And, have you seen the videos of Alec walking in the tree video? He doesn't look too nimble to me. I'm just saying.
Taylor sounded like a criminal defense attorney. Do you think that they are going to float forward, a theory of two shooters? I had a guy named Kim Varner on, who I don't know if you know, but he's a well-known criminal defense attorney in South Carolina. He's been around for many, many, many years. And he said, this sounds like and I've said this before, but this is what he said on the show. It has all the makings of a cartel hit. Will the defense muddy the waters and say exactly what you're saying right now? I've never seen a case of this. 2 long guns being used at short distance, 2 different weapons from one guy.
Well, I don't know. I don't necessarily buy the whole cartel thing.
Yeah.
I don't. Maybe I don't buy it though. However, I am concerned from the defense perspective that they've not exhibited a theory to start with as an alternative theory. If that's going to be your alternative theory, you need to drive it home, not just like a shotgun, no pun intended, splatter, shots everywhere and see what sticks. That to me is not an effective defense. You've got to have at least one good theory to drive home. And I'm looking for that. And I hadn't necessarily seen that yet. I've seen a lot of, breaking apart the state's case that, hey, there's this alternative, but I'm still waiting for that one theory to come from the defense that the jurors can cling to and say, that's a possibility. That's reasonable doubt right there.
So the forensic pathologist went on, and you had mentioned it, Taylor. So just to follow up, the second shotgun wound on Paul was located, according to the pathologist, on the top of the left shoulder. The bullet traveled across the shoulder and into the neck and face. And then there's a large exit wound on the top of the right side of the head, which explains a lot about how that brain matter was found where it was. There was 0 defensive wounds on Paul Murdaugh's body, per Dr. Reimer. And as far as the number of gunshot wounds, Maggie sustained a total of 5 gunshot wounds, which could be, the pathologist said, from 4 or 5 separate shots. But another obviously important piece of evidence was stippling was found around Maggie's wounds, indicating that the weapon was fired at close range. Now, Gigi, on Tuesday, we're going to get some cross from the defense on this. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's where we left off today. It seemed like Judge Newman was maybe going to let him go and go ahead and cross, but he said about an hour that he would need. So we broke for the day. So that's first up tomorrow is cross of this pathologist, and then we'll see who else they've got on tap. But I agree with Taylor. I think that the lead investigator is going to be the one to close it out, try to put it all in a neat little box. Right now, we just kind of have a lot of little pieces outside the box. I mean, circumstantially, I think there's so much there. And one thing, too, that I'm surprised the prosecution hasn't jumped on, and I could be wrong in my times, but if you look at when the car was put in park, at the time he would have went to the kennels and seen the bodies, it's only like a minute and some seconds where he would have had to go find Paul, try to roll him over, check for a pulse, then go 30 yards to where Maggie was. Only like a minute and a little bit more before that moment the car is put in park, and then he calls 911. Unless I'm off somewhere. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But if I were the prosecution, like I would have been all over that. Maybe that's something they say for if he gets on the stand and says, how is it that, at the time too, he's not skinny like he was. You know what I'm saying? Probably not as fast as he might be today. How do you do all that in a minute when the bodies are 30 yards apart? And get back to your car. Maybe he's got his phone in his hand. I don't know. But still, a minute to, do all that. Well, I think it's a stretch.
And we are going to get into the STS Nation questions in a moment. Just one more thing, and that, of course, is Curtis Eddie Smith, Cousin Eddie. He is possibly the most anticipated witness in this whole trial, next to Alex Murdaugh, I would say, if Alex does, in fact, take the stand. When might we see Cousin Eddie, as he is called? I've had Amy Zimmercheck, his attorney, on. And she says, don't be fooled by the moniker Crazy Eddie. She says he's an intelligent guy and is going to make a great witness for the state. But when do you think we might see him on the stand, Gigi?
I don't know. As of today, she did not know. From what I was told, that if he was even going to testify, it seems like it could open up, a big can of worms for both sides to bring him up there. You got him involved in the roadside shooting. Is that something that, they just don't want in there? And then now this is just rumor, and I usually don't do rumor, but apparently there's a recording out there of him telling somebody, "I'll testify to what you want if you pay me." So I don't know if maybe the state just doesn't want, he doesn't have much credibility to this jury because he was so intertwined with Alec. They don't know about that. They don't know, as of right now, they don't know anything about Eddie Smith. So you're going to have to talk about potentially the drug deals they were in together. You're going to have to talk about this roadside shooting where he says he's wrestling the gun away and it goes off. And, my kids get bigger boo-boos as when they were toddlers on the side of the table, like whacking their head. But I don't know. I think it's a risk to bring him in.
What do you think, Taylor? If you put on your prosecutor's hat, would you do it or no?
I'm kind of with Gigi. I'm not sure that the benefit, is worth the squeeze. I'm not sure about that, what you're really getting now chronologically, he would be after the fact, based on the storyline from the media and how this unfolded. And so the government's tried to kind of chronologically set forth the story as best as they can. And relatively, as Gigi said, circumstantially, I mean, they're leaving no doubt that this is the only possible suspect here, unless we hear something from the defense, which, the jurors are told they cannot deliberate until they hear all the evidence and is released back to them in the jury room. So hopefully they're holding that, not making any predispositions. But I again, it opens up a possible theory for the defense to take advantage of that I'm not necessarily sure from the prosecution, that they're going to want to go down that road. And I've tried cases against these folks over there. Most of them, a couple of them came out of the Richland County Solicitor's Office. John Metters over there, he's sharp. He's a sharp prosecutor. Creighton Waters, pretty sharp prosecutor. I think they're thinking about these things too, whether or not it's one of those. It's not. It just muddies the water or allows the defense muddy the water more.
Well, and the other thing too is the defense, filed a motion that Eddie failed a lot, which isn't admissible, but failed a lie detector test when asked specifically, were you involved before or after the murders or something to that effect, and even included the little, jumper thing where it shows you're being deceptive, and then some little screen grabs from like the security cameras when he was having it. And of course it's not admissible, but you bring cousin Eddie in. I don't know. Can you even ask about a lie detector test though on the stand?
It depends. Okay. Most of the time, no.
That's what I thought.
Now, I'll tell you, a lot of those pretrial motions, from my perspective, were for media purposes, because I think there was a lot going on, jostling for position in terms of the media, because they knew that this was going to be a high profile covered case. And I mean, you only have so many people in that county. Only have so many people, and the people that were on the jury saying they never heard of this case, I got my thoughts.
And on to the STS Nation questions and comments. And I'll preface this by saying, Taylor, I'm going to toss this one to you, that we had a criminal defense attorney who's also an NBC News and MSNBC analyst who talked about prosecutorial overkill and felt that the state was actually hurting themselves by bringing in all the financial crimes. So this is in response to that. I don't agree about the financials being distracting. In this particular case, they are crucial to why he did this, quote unquote, allegedly. He cares for no one but himself, but he's a great actor in a good old boy way. And I truly feel he did this to deflect. Your response to that? Should they, are the financials crucial to this case?
I think they're crucial to the prosecution in painting him to be a bad person, which is the exact reason the defense didn't want it in. I think clearly that's why the prosecution wanted it in, because I talked about this with some other folks that Tony Satterfield and his intellectually disabled brother did not deserve anything that happened. They lost their mother, and then they were cheated by this man completely. That's despicable. And that to me is just, I guess if you could do it to that person, they're trying to show that, all right, this kind of person could murder his own son, could murder his wife. I think people understand murdering your wife potentially, or spouse. I think there's, I think you could see that type of heat of passion, get angry and mad and overreact, but killing your son, I mean, killing an offspring is just inhumane. It's inhumane. It's unhuman. It's not civilized. And I think that Tony Satterfield taking advantage of an intellectually disabled, adult, which, I think Tony's brother is my understanding, just was hammering home that this guy doesn't care for anybody. And so I think that it was necessary in terms of that for the prosecution. But I think it's gotten a little bit turned around because the defense was able to ask about how he cared about his family from each of these people that were close to his family. And they didn't have anything bad to say about how he acted towards his family. So, I kind of am split both ways here.
And Taylor, this is not one of the questions, but one of my questions. We did a show last week. My beautiful mom co-hosts about once a week. And she said, hey, no one's talking about Maggie. No one's talking about who she was as a human being. She's one of the victims. So we did a show about Maggie. And now I just totally lost my train of thought, but it had to do with Maggie Murdaugh, and it will come back to me. And I will remember the question. I am getting, like my mother, I'm having a senior moment in the middle of the podcast. But while I try to retain that information, Lilibeth Vieja is a friend of the show, Gigi, and she commented, Murdaugh did not have an opioid addiction. He had greed for money. That was his addiction. Are there rumblings? Because there's a lot of talk, amongst people that, look, he was functioning fine. There were people who testified who said they didn't notice anything. So what is the word on the street, I guess, about this? Do people feel that Alec had a drug addiction or no? And people are good at covering that stuff up. You start to get immune to the drugs too, so you can handle a lot more. But what is the street saying about all this?
A lot of people pretty much everybody, I'll just say that I've talked to felt like, it's not unfathomable that maybe he had a little addiction to some opioids, 3 or 4 a day. But I mean, look, the amount of money that they are claiming to be missing, and there's no way that he was taking just this excess, because there comes a point where whether you're tolerant or not, your body's like uncle. He looked very healthy. He did not have the sunken in face. He was able, but people can function. You have functioning alcoholics, people you never would suspect have addictions, are able to fool everyday people that they know and love. So I'm not saying he wasn't addicted. I think the general consensus is that it was amplified for sympathy. And also at the time when he went to rehab, you have to remember he wasn't charged with the murders. So he was able to go to rehab. And then when he was done, he turned himself in. So some people feel, was it just to get like a couple of months to get ready for all this, or, but I don't think anybody believes this guy had some multi-million-dollar a year opioid habit. And if he did, then that's too bad, because it doesn't discriminate. Rich, poor, I don't care. I mean, people get addicted to that stuff, but the amount that he was supposedly doing, I don't see how people wouldn't know.
And I will blame my senior moment on a Super Bowl hangover, but I now remember what it is. Are you surprised, Taylor, that Maggie's family hasn't been more vocal? Not speaking out to the media. Some people say, why the hell would you speak to the media? And I used to be in the media, so I understand that. But you're surprised we haven't really heard much at all from her family?
Yeah, I'm not, though, necessarily. because you have cases a lot of times that involve families that really just don't know what happened. And I would probably put, her family in including Buster in that category. They don't know what happened. I'm, born skeptical of the government. When the government says something, does it pass the smell test on everything they say? That's the libertarian in me. But
including UFOs and aliens, I hope.
We shot some down this week, right? I think we've shot a bunch down recently, right?
Yeah,
come on now.
Every day now.
This is like an episode of South Park.
But I digress.
So it doesn't surprise me. I see it in, I do a lot of DUI work as well, and felony DUI when there's family members that have, the government still charges felony DUI, even if it's a family member that, was in the car with the person that, caused the accident and was allegedly under the influence. And it's kind of that, all right, well, we have our loyalty to both, to the person that was, driving and the person that was injured. And so you're kind of caught between, I don't necessarily know which position I want to take. I've dealt with that recently, this couple weeks ago, in some cases where, it was the daughter of, a dispute between a husband or a mom and a dad, and they were just kind of middle ground. So that doesn't surprise me whatsoever, that you haven't heard a whole bunch, as well as maybe they just respect the rule of law and the trial process, and will get their day in court to speak to the judge at sentencing regarding how they feel once that comes out.
Here's a subtle point. I want to toss it right back to you, Taylor, from you, Sinley. It is mind-boggling that the prosecution is choosing to spend the weight of their case proving the defendant's motive instead of proving his guilt. Do you agree with this?
Well, motive goes to guilt. So I'd say that they don't have to have a motive, but it's very useful to explaining why something would happen when the jurors get back there and start talking. There's only so much circumstantial evidence out there too. Whoever committed these murders did a relatively decent job at getting rid of the weapons, the clothes, if there were clothes. I don't know, but I think it's necessary, and I don't think that it's. A lot of people have bashed the prosecution for that. I'm not going to necessarily sit there and say that it's not appropriate because you only have so much circumstantial evidence, and you've got to provide as much as possible for the jury. So when they go back there, they rule in your favor.
And Gigi, Joe Tracy writes, there have been numerous men who killed their wives and their families when they got into financial stress. It happens a lot, especially with narcissists like AM. I mean, I know Taylor alluded to this, and I've said it before. I have a son. I cannot imagine ever harming my son, but I'm not Alex Murdaugh, and not saying that he did or didn't. But does she raise a good point that people reach a breaking point, the stress gets too much, and it is possible?
Yeah, I mean, I covered a case about 6 months ago where a guy killed his parents and dismembered them and spread them out all over because he had built up these intricate lies that he was going to go work for SpaceX, and he was in college and he was getting caught, actively getting caught, murders his parents, thinking it's just going to get rid of the problem. Well, we all know how that goes. He's in prison for life. But I think it would have been more believable if their motive would have been he just snapped. Like he had a moment where, it just all hit him. This is all coming down. You had the boat crash. Who knows what's going on in their marriage? It seems by all accounts it was fine. But then we find out her wedding band's under the seat. I don't know. I just feel like the motive is hard to follow. It is for everybody I've talked to. I think for me, it would have been easier just to say, look, he just lost it. And just there were guns laying around and boom, boom, he does it. So, I don't know. It's going to be hard for this jury. I do not think this is going to be a quick deliberation.
Though, I'm sorry to interrupt there.
Go ahead.
The problem is that video. there's no animosity in that video
Right, I
whatsoever. So
know.
to just snap, I just can't, there's laughing. There
That's
is
a good point,
laughing in
yeah.
that video that they're talking about what the dog got. I mean, whether it was a chicken or what, a
A
guinea.
guinea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a guinea, Joel?
No, I have not.
Never
All I
seen
know
a
is a
guinea?
guinea pig.
Guineas in the country, they let you know when the unwanted guests are around. So I guess they had guineas out there on that farm there. But that's the whole thing. Is like it didn't seem like that there was any anger in that video at
And at
all.
the same time, though, if you look at it, there was no anger in that video, and does that kind of play along the same lines of it makes no sense. They're laughing, and 4 minutes later, you're gonna tell me he planned to murder the both of them. I think it kinda goes both ways with either one of those in that how can you be laughing? Because I'll tell you that Snapchat video for me gave me pause for the first time. Really, I watched it. Paul's laughing behind the camera. I was like, better than it was, wasn't it? I mean, it's just normal stuff. And then you think an hour later, this jury has got the picture in their mind. He is shooting his son in the head, or, I mean, he's murdering his wife and his son, this very son that he is laughing with an hour before, having a very normal time. So I don't know, but
these are all the things that the jury's going to struggle with, and probably why you are right that it's not going to be a quick deliberation. So Taylor, we get these comments a lot. This one comes from George 7058, and I've got to say that STS Nation is definitely partial to Alex Murdaugh being guilty and should be convicted. So he writes, no offense here to you, Taylor. He writes, defense attorneys are always looking for an excuse and an out for a sociopath. How do you respond to him?
Well, that's my job. My job's not to get an out. My job's to question the government's case. My job is to hold the government accountable for what they say, to make sure they can prove what they say. For folks, I typically hear it that you're a liberal defense attorney. That's probably the farthest from the truth. I am a gun carrying, red-blooded American that I'm going to put the government to the test, whether it be in a murder case, whether it be in what they're trying to feed me through Congress as to why they're passing these laws to restrict my freedoms. I'm going to put them to the test. It's not an excuse. It's the process and system that we have, and that's why we have it. And it's the best process and system in the world. There's not many other countries where every single person that's accused of a crime gets a lawyer to represent them and to get the resources to hire expert witnesses to put the government to the test. Because the whole theory is I'd rather that a guilty man go free than lock an innocent man up. Because over the years, we've locked a whole lot of innocent people up. And so I'd err on the side of caution that we set guilty people free, even if it means someone that is actually guilty gets free, than lock an innocent person up. So it's not an excuse. It's the job that I chose because I like to fight for individuals. It's the job that I chose because I just not going to take the government for their word.
And that's what makes America America. A couple more questions and we'll get some final thoughts. This one to you, Gigi, from Doris. I think the prosecution method of questioning has been so absurd. They stand there with their list, check off each question without listening to the response. A witness testifier says something, and then the dense prosecutor asks the very question the person just gave the answer to. And I've heard this criticism quite a bit. Is the state doing a bad job of listening to the witnesses?
It's not something I've noticed, but it's different. I think sitting in the courtroom and then being home. To be honest, I prefer to be home covering a case because I can type it out and all that, and I can rewind. So for me, it's not something that's been really, really obvious, but I have heard other people say that too. So, I don't know. It's so weird. Either you're like, the state has just put on this really confusing loose case. And then you have people that say, look, yeah, it's circumstantial, but it's all day. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So I don't know. I mean, I think maybe in the end we'll find they did I don't know. I don't know. I'm so conflicted about this one. Honestly, y'all.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen.
And honesty is the best policy. It's good to admit that.
I have no clue.
Outside Russia, got to take that name with a grain of salt. Hope it's not a bot. Here's the thing with Snapchat. I thought this was interesting, what they wrote here. My daughter's Snapchat showed her at 3 a.m. around the corner from our home and walking when, in fact, she was sleeping in her bed. This happened numerous times. Another time I was with her and it showed us at a completely different location. So I wonder, can Snapchat be trusted with time and place? Me personally, I don't trust it. Taylor, that's an interesting point. I have never heard that Snapchat is inaccurate, but I assume the defense would have looked into that. And if so, might be bringing someone on to say that.
Yeah, I talked about that. I said, I talked about that with some other folks, that there were some questions regarding the connectability to cell service. And so I didn't hear this from any witnesses yet. But say, for example, I don't have Snapchat. I'm not that cool. I'm not uppity up. I think my wife had it at one point. It was Snapchatting with her friends or whatnot, but I don't have it. I guess I'm getting old. I've got the Instagram. And on that Instagram, you can load a picture, but it doesn't load until it has enough signal to upload. So the question is, when was the actual video created, not necessarily when was it uploaded? Because if it was created on the actual device itself, that would have a hard, fast time and date as to when it was created. Whether it was uploaded at a particular time, I don't know how that's been spliced or differentiated between in this case. I did not hear anything talking about that, but I have questioned whether or not some of this is accurate as to the time frames, because there was witnesses that testified there was no signal there at their signal was very, very, it was poor at the kennels. And there was one specific place, like outside on the deck, that I think that Dick Harpootlian got out of one person. You had to go to this one specific part of the house to send messages from the housekeeper. So I've questioned some of these timelines based on whether or not there was actually accurate signal for these videos to be uploaded or sent, or so there you may hear some experts regarding these digital forensic experts regarding this type of information down the road.
And that's a very interesting, subtle distinction, but that timestamp on those Snapchat videos, by the way, could be a big difference in how jurors look at this. But this final comment comes from Christine Madrishin, and she writes, rewatch. Mark Tinsley said he would sue Maggie and Paul personally. If he did, all the money and property Alex put in Maggie's name would no longer be safe. It matters. Gigi, is that a good point in terms of the financial motive causing him to lose his you-know-what and go ahead and kill these two people?
Yeah, I mean, look, anything fits in this theory, honestly, when it has to do with money. Now, we know that according to the defense, neither Paul nor Maggie had life insurance, but we know Alec was putting money in her name to hide that money from this civil action. So I think anything's possible when it comes to money and Alex Murdaugh. He has no moral compass when it comes to money. We've seen that. So yeah, I think anything's possible if we're looking at the state's theory of motive, for sure.
And the great Steve Cohen, my partner in true crime, has done it again. He books us the best guests, and Taylor Bell is one of them now. He is focused on representing criminal defendants ever since his student days at the University of South Carolina. That's where he got his law degree. He clerked for the Richland County Public Defender's Office in Columbia, South Carolina. He was there for 6 years before switching over to private practice. not only does he carry a gun, but he also knows how to wrestle. So he'll take you down first. Taylor, what are you looking for? Is this really going to wind up in the next week and a half? And where do you stand? Are you thinking hung jury, mistrial, conviction? Which way are you leaning right now?
Well, I think it depends on whether the jury does their job, whether they do their job to solely look at the evidence of financial crimes for the purpose of motive and not for propensity to just be a bad human being. Because Alex Murdaugh is the absolute worst human being out there in terms of stealing. He steals from anybody. He steals from his friends. He steals from his business, law firm. He steals from the intellectually disabled. So he is not a good human being. But in terms of the murder, I'm still on the fence right now because I'm trying to hold back on making a decision until I hear from the defense here, as the jury should do. But if the jury does their job, I think they're still on the fence right now and waiting for the defense to provide their evidence, and then they'll deliberate. But if you want to know if he's a bad person, he's admitted to stealing. Yes.
And Taylor, let me ask you a question. When you're going to lunch these days with your law partners and other legal people, are you guys talking about this case every day? Is it on the top of your mind still?
Sometimes, only because I've been doing some commentating on it with some outlets, and we'll talk about it. I get their opinions. I've had people message me from, folks that I grew up with, asking me my thoughts on it, have heard some things that I've said, and always throwing their 2 cents in there. And I've gotten a mix of, folks that are not in the legal field saying he totally did it. And then folks in the non-legal field saying they're just not buying it. And then we talk about it. We absolutely do, because it's all over the media.
Gigi Mi-Kelvey is host of the popular true crime podcast, one of the best names in all of podcasting, Pretty Lies and Alibis, with her devoted following, the Alibiers. I love that. She's also been covering the Alex Murdaugh trial from the get-go for the Law and Crime Network, owned by Dan Abrams, who I once worked for. If you can't watch the trial, she is breaking down testimony each and every day on the podcast, Pretty Lies and Alibis. What's your takeaway today, Gigi?
My takeaway is we seem to be getting the home stretch, but I feel like we have a long way to go. It's just going to be an interesting week with the defense up. Let's see what they have to say. I agree with Taylor. I'm still on the fence. I mean, yeah, he's a terrible human, but stealing doesn't equal murder. And, usually I have a really good idea before I start covering a case because I research so much. But with this one, I just don't know. I think it's going to be an interesting outcome, however it is. And I don't think it's going to be quick. None of us think we're going to be, 3 hours after they're sent back, we've got a verdict. So we shall see. Lots of questions. Will Cousin Eddie be there? All kinds of stuff.
And Gigi, are you wearing your N95 mask tomorrow to court?
I'm wearing my mask because I'm a primary caregiver. My 88-year-old grandma is living with me right now, so I'm not bringing anything to her. So yes, I'm masked up. Plus, it means I don't have to put as much makeup on here in the morning because I'm a big tomboy. So I've never wore so much makeup in 4 weeks as I have since this trial started.
As they say in the South, bless her heart.
Bless my heart.
Thank you, both of you, for coming on. We'll get you both back on if you're willing to do so. And quick programming note, we will be following this trial all week. We're also still following the horrific quadruple homicides out of Moscow, Idaho. This Friday, another episode of True Crime. Get your true crime with Phil and Gil. And then Sunday, my lovely mother will be back in the chair. Until then, love you, America. Love you, South Carolina.